Beneath Rome's gleaming marble colonnades, an emperor's restless ambition began to reverberate like distant thunder rolling down the Via Appia toward Jerusalem. Picture torchlight dancing across legionary shields as columns of steel descend on the dusty Judean hills, hear silver ripped from the temple echoing like a cracked bell in the night, and taste the soot that rose from villages Nero decreed unworthy of his patience. While poets swooned over the curl of his locks and the sweetness of his song, the princeps himself tuned his golden lyre to the screams of provinces in revolt, vowing the melody would not end until every discordant voice was silenced. Dare you march beside Nero as he fans this budding rebellion into an all-consuming inferno across Judea? Jerusalem in May 66 CE sweltered beneath an uneasy stillness, as though every stone waited for a spark. That spark took the form of Gessius Florus, Nero's newly appointed procurator, whose polished calceade across the temple courts while a squad of spearmen cleared a path. Brandishing an imperial writ, Florus ordered the seizure of 17 talents, more than 250,000 denarii from the temple treasury, labeling the theft a matter of overdue taxes. Coins rang into leather sacks. Outraged priests could only watch as reverence was plundered in broad daylight. Retribution followed within hours. On the main thoroughfare, Florus staged a brutal warning. 24 randomly selected Jews were crucified within sight of the holy city, the crosses placed so close that passers-by inhaled the pitch and heard every groan. The spectacle served as a living proclamation: defiance would be paid for in flesh. News of sacrilege and bloodshed raced along Judea's hill roads. In Sepphoris, stones flew at a Roman patrol. At Masada, zealot banners rose crimson against the sky. Each clash prompted fresh levies from Florus, feeding a vicious loop in which oppression bred revolt, and revolt justified harsher exactions. Couriers bearing pleas for restraint galloped west toward Rome, but Nero, absorbed in rehearsals and construction plans for his Domus Aurea, gave little more than a dismissive gesture. Judea's unrest was deemed a nuisance to be crushed by the legions, rather than soothed by policy. Thus the tinderbox remained, crackling in the summer heat. Empty temple coffers reverberated like hollow drums after dark, each echo reminding Jerusalem that even the sacred silver could not withstand an emperor's vanity. In the gathering dusk, the price of Nero's extravagance was already measurable, in treasuries stripped bare, in crosses lining the roads, and in the mounting certainty that Judea's blood would soon be demanded in full. By early 67 CE, the embers of revolt had spread beyond Jerusalem, and Nero demanded a demonstration of Rome's inexhaustible power. Into this cauldron strode Titus Flavius Vespasianus, the hardened veteran of Britain and Germania, summoned from semi-retirement with orders as blunt as a legionary's pilum: subdue Judea, spare no expense, show no weakness. Vespasian assembled an army of nearly 60,000 legions, 5 Macedonica, ex Fretensis and ex Fien Apollinaris, reinforced by Syrian auxiliaries and Nabatean cavalry. The column that marched south from Antioch was less an expedition than a moving city of iron. Siege engines groaned on ox carts, pack mules carried prefabricated timber towers, and thousands of slaves tramped beside the camp followers, who would strip rebel towns of lumber, livestock, and labor. Galilee became the proving ground. At Jotapata, Josephus's red-cloaked defenders watched in horror as 15 Roman battering rams hammered the limestone walls with metronomic precision. When the gate finally splintered, Vespasian permitted a day-long slaughter. Corpses clogged the ravines while survivors were paraded in chains. Tarichaea fell next, its harbor choked with bodies after a merciless pursuit by Roman boats. Further east, the fortress of Gamla held out atop basalt cliffs until siege towers, winches, and sheer attrition drove the defenders to leap into the gorge rather than taste captivity. With each victory, Vespasian welded fear to momentum. Survivors were crucified along the highways in such numbers that Josephus likened the crosses to forests without leaves. Grain stores were torched, wells poisoned, and abandoned villages left smoldering as grim milestones of imperial resolve. For Nero, these desolations were useful signals, proof that the costly legions were earning their keep. For Judea, they were prelude to an apocalypse yet to come. Yet Vespasian's campaign was more than a blunt cudgel. Engineers mapped roads with the precision of surveyors, scouts threaded hill trails to isolate rebel strongholds, diplomatic envoys bribed or bullied neutral towns into surrender. The general's genius lay in combining methodical strategy with theatrical brutality, ensuring that news of each atrocity galloped ahead of the eagles, softening the next target before the first pillar flew. By the summer of 68 CE, the northern revolt lay in ruins, its towns emptied or enslaved, its defenders crucified or sold to the lowest bidder. Nero hailed the progress from Rome, scarcely suspecting that the man executing his orders would soon use those same legions to claim the throne for himself. For the moment, however, Vespasian remained exactly what the emperor required, an iron fist, closing inexorably around Judea's throat. When Nero's Domus Aurea rose from the ashes of the Great Fire of 64 CE, its opulence seemed almost mythic. Corridors sheathed in shimmering marble, walls plated with gold leaf, ceilings inlaid with mother-of-pearl that pivoted to sprinkle diners with rose petals and saffron-scented dew. The emperor's architects even flooded a man-made lake beside the palace, so sunlight would shimmer across the facade like rippling coin. Yet behind every gilded panel lay a darker ledger, one written in the plunder of Judea. As Vespasian's legions scoured Galilee and Perea, treasuries were emptied under the polite fiction of war indemnities. In Jerusalem, temple guardians watched helplessly while holy vessels, silver trumpets and gold-rimmed lampstands were boxed for transport west. The same sacred shekels that once rang against the stone of the sanctuary soon echoed in Roman foundries, melted and recast into decorative grapevines for Nero's banqueting halls. Provincial tax collectors, emboldened by Florus's earlier example, levied fresh surcharges to keep the bullion stream steady, citing the cost of siege engines and road repairs, but funneling an ever larger share toward the emperor's building works. The numbers staggered even seasoned senators. Josephus would later record 10,000 talents in treasure stripped from Judea during the conflict's first 2 years alone, enough to mint more than 500 million denarii. Marble cutters along the Aegean coast worked double shifts. Craftsmen from Syrophoenicia inlaid ivory, ebony and polished agate into Nero's rotating dining room, all paid for by coins once earmarked for festival offerings in Jerusalem. Every fresh casualty and every confiscated talent thus added another sheen to the Golden House, turning an emperor's vanity project into a gleaming ledger of provincial agony. On Rome's streets, rumors spread that the scent of Judean incense lingered in the palace corridors, that the very air of the eastern sanctuary had been transplanted to feed Nero's appetite for novelty. In Judea, meanwhile, resistance hardened at the thought that sacred wealth now gilded the ceilings of a pleasure palace. Rebellion ceased to be merely a matter of independence. It became a struggle to reclaim sanctity itself. Thus, Nero's architectural marvel doubled as propaganda and provocation. Each sparkling frieze proclaimed the empire's reach, while every missing chalice in Jerusalem testified to its cost. The palace gleamed, but its splendor spoke a language of conquest, reminding all who entered that gold can sanctify an altar, or in the hands of an emperor, glorify ambition at the expense of a nation brought to its knees. The price of rebellion was counted not only in razed towns, but in human trophies shipped westward by the thousands. After each siege, legionaries sorted survivors with bureaucratic efficiency, artisans for imperial workshops, strong youths for the mines of Egypt, and the rest, those deemed suitable for entertainment, consigned to Rome's insatiable arenas. Josephus places the tally of prisoners at about 97,000, a living cargo that funneled through Ptolemy's Caesarea and Alexandria before disembarking at Ostia and Puzzuli like so much plundered grain. Upon arrival, chains were exchanged for branded collars stamped Vespi AVG. Marching through Rome's streets, the captives provided a macabre preview for the populace, their sun-bleached garments still faintly dusted with Judean soil. Senators took balcony seats as the Flavian triumph of 71 CE processed past the forum, loot from the temple, golden candelabrum, silver trumpets, the table of shewbread gleamed atop carts, while shackled priests trudged behind, living footnotes to the emperor's victory inscription. The real theater followed. At the temporary wooden amphitheater on the Caelian Hill and in the sprawling Circus Maximus, producers staged one-sided spectacles billed as Orbis Domini Vincit, the empire conquers the world. Jewish captives, unfamiliar with gladiatorial etiquette, were armed with mismatched helmets and dull blades, forced to brandish symbols of their own faith as shields. Some were made to reenact the siege of Jotapata on painted sets, battling trained retiari beneath frescoed backdrops of Galilean cliffs. Others fed the midday interlude, tethered to poles, while starved panthers, imported from Numidia, were released in orchestrated waves to prolong the crowd's anticipation. These performances served multiple ends. They amortized the cost of war through ticket sales and betting pools. They reinforced the message that resistance was futile, and they offered Nero's successors, first Galba, then Otho, then Vitellius, a ready spectacle to placate a capital reeling from civil upheaval. When construction of the Flavian amphitheatre began in 72 CE, much of the stonework was financed by the very temple treasures paraded in the triumph, while its inaugural games would be stocked with the last reserves of Judean prisoners. Across the Mediterranean, news of these exhibitions filtered back to a land still under siege, hardening resolve among those who remained free. In Rome, the crowds roared approval, scarcely noticing that the arena sand-absorbing Jewish blood had been purchased with their victims' sacred gold. Thus, the spectacle perfected its own economy. Plunder paid for entertainment, entertainment justified plunder, and the empire's appetite for suffering grew only sharper with every dying scream that echoed beneath imperial colonnades. While Vespasian's eagles advanced across Judea, magistrates in the capital targeted the empire's oldest diaspora congregation, the Jewish quarter that clustered along the Tiber in Trastevere. Imperial freedman Gaius Aphonius Tigellinus, already feared as Nero's chief of security, circulated edicts demanding an exact census of every Jew in the city, including assets, occupations, and male relatives of military age. Synagogues were ordered to surrender the annual temple tax still being collected for Jerusalem. What could not be paid in coin was taken in plate and property titles. Statues of the emperor appeared at neighborhood intersections. Unsanctioned refusal to salute became grounds for immediate confiscation of goods and summary deportation. The crackdown relied on a lattice of informants. Former slaves, angry creditors, and envious artisans filed denunciations in exchange for a share of seized estates. Praetorian cohorts staged midnight sweeps, sealing tenement blocks and rousting entire families into torchlit courtyards, while scribes tallied contraband scrolls or confiscated shekel hoards. In the Subura district, grain shipments belonging to Judean merchants were impounded pending investigation, then quietly rerouted to feed the Domus Aurea workforce. Even burial societies felt the blade. Collegia charter renewals were withheld unless leaders produced loyalty oaths and hostages from among their own kin. Official rhetoric framed these measures as preemptive security, ensuring that the flame of Eastern sedition finds no fuel in Rome. In practice, they operated as a revenue stream and political theater. Public auctions of expropriated townhouses drew senators eager for bargains. Proclamations posted on the rostra listed the latest arrests beside bold-faced totals of assets reclaimed for the fiscus. Every new line of text underscored a message of collective punishment. Rebellion anywhere in the empire would translate to penalties everywhere. A rebel's creed was spoken. Rumors soon linked the confiscations to Nero's architectural indulgence. Artisans recognized Trastevere silverwork, hammered into leaf for palace ceiling tiles, a Torah breastplate reportedly recast as a candelabrum in the imperial triclinia. Such stories, true or embellished, deepened despair among Rome's Jewish poor and emboldened zealots across the sea, completing a vicious circle in which repression at the center inflamed resistance on the frontier. In 68 CE, Nero's suicide briefly checked the campaign, but the machinery he built survived him. Vespasian, upon securing the purple, formalized the exactions as the fiscus Iudaicus, transforming what had begun as a wartime purge into a standing tax on faith. Thus, the capital's own streets bore silent witness to the paradox of imperial might, a ruler strong enough to crush rebellion abroad, yet fearful enough to keep a dagger poised above an unarmed congregation at home. On 9 June 68 CE, as dawn broke over the haughty of Phaon, Nero pressed a dagger to his own throat and gasped, "Qualis artifex perio, what an artist dies in me." His passing did not close the curtain on the conflict he had kindled. It merely flung the empire into a darker act. Civil war erupted in rapid succession. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, each claimant siphoning legions from the Eastern Front. while Judea smoldered behind them like an untended forge. Into this vacuum stepped Vespasian, crowned emperor by acclamation of his troops in July 69 CE. He turned command of the still unfinished campaign over to his son Titus. The younger Flavian tightened the vice around Jerusalem with methodical precision. Earthen ramparts encircled the city, battering rams pounded the second wall, and siege towers loomed above the temple courts like pagan idols of iron. By late summer 70 CE, flames licked the cedar-beamed sanctuary, molten gold streamed through cracked flagstones, and the great western retaining wall, later misnamed the Wailing Wall, was all that stood amid the charred hush. The fall of Jerusalem marked the most lucrative harvest of the war. Temple treasures financed the Colosseum's foundations. Prisoners hauled travertine blocks beneath a triumphal arch that immortalized their defeat in bas-relief. Back in Judea, fields lay fallow, and the roads that once bustled with pilgrims now led only to scorched villages or to rows of crucifixes weathering in the desert wind. The land was quieter than at any point in living memory, yet the silence echoed louder than battle. It was the hush of a culture uprooted, of prayers severed from their sanctuary. Nero's name faded from imperial decrees, erased from some monuments, blackened on others, but his imprint endured in policy. The fiscus Iudaicus, a head tax imposed on every Jew in the empire, converted spiritual loss into a yearly imperial revenue stream, a fiscal reminder that rebellion's cost never expires. Even the domed chambers of the new Flavian palaces bore gilding hammered from recast menorah arms, catching candlelight in ripples that told the story of a shrine extinguished to illuminate an emperor's ceiling. Thus, the emperor who fancied himself a virtuoso left the stage amid smoke and discordant screams, bequeathing a war that outlived him, a diaspora that reshaped a faith, and ruins that whispered his vanity long after his melodies were forgotten. The ashes he scattered across Jerusalem's shattered stones and Rome's glittering halls alike settled into the very mortar of imperial history, reminding each successor that extravagant power can outlast its wielder, but so can the ruin it leaves behind.